Welcome to our program, Asia in Focus, Climate Justice and the Business and Human Rights Agenda. My name is Sean Lees and I work for the United Nations Development Program in Asia Pacific. We're once again joined in the studio by students from the International Relations and Global Affairs Program, Mahidol University in Thailand. Welcome to you all. Today we present another episode of our Asian Focus series focused on the intersection of business, climate change, and human rights. As you may know, climate change will have a bigger impact on Asia than any other region. But are governments and industry in Asia doing enough? What recourse do people have on the front lines of climate change? In this episode, we're going to learn more about the role being taken by lawyers, human rights advocates, and communities in ensuring remedies for those most impacted. Today, I'm joined by attorney Roberto Cadiz, president of the Climate Action and Human Rights Institute, and former commissioner of the Commission on Human Rights of the Philippines. We're also joined by lawyer and activist Saw Ratanamani Pongkla, Executive Coordinator of the Community Resource Center Foundation. Welcome to the program. But before we put the first round of questions to our guests, let's watch a short clip about people living on the Gulf of Thailand in a place called Bang Krachao, where encroaching seawater is putting the livelihoods of farmers at risk.
น้ำในแม่น้ำเจ้าพระยาที่สูงขึ้นเนี่ยมันผลกระทบมันเยอะนะครับมันท่วมมันเข้ามาในเลือกสวนมันขังอยู่มันออกไปไม่ได้เพราะน้ำที่ขึ้นมาเนี่ยส่วนมากมันจะเป็นน้ำเค็มมันทำให้ปลูกผลไม้ก็ลำบากเพราะน้ำเค็มมันมีปัญหากับไม้เล็กๆแล้วก็ทำเกษตรลำบากแล้วก็พอมาขังอยู่แล้วก็ทำให้น้ำเน่าพอน้ำเน่าก็ยุงเยอะปลูกต้นไม้ก็ไม่ได้แล้วก็โรคระบาดก็เยอะที่นี่เคยมีโรคระบาดไข้เลือดออกผู้ใหญ่นะตายด้วยจริงๆแล้วที่เนี้ยเราอยู่มาตั้งแต่ชวดปู่ย่าตายายมาถึงเราในรุ่น4รุ่น5แล้วถ้าปล่อยไว้แบบนี้ไปเรื่อยๆก็จะคนที่อยู่อาศัยเนี่ยจะอยู่ยากถ้าหลังจากประตูน้ำเกิดพังขึ้นมาท่วมเช้าท่วมเย็นนะท่วมตลอดก็จะอยู่กันไม่ได้
แล้วทุกวันนี้คือน้ำทะเลจะหนุนสูงขึ้นเรื่อยๆเรื่อยๆนะครับโดยที่มีการวัดเรื่องการน้ำทะเลหนุนสูงขึ้นมาโดยทั้งกรมชลประทานก็ดีทั้งหน่วยงานที่รับผิดชอบเรื่องน้ำก็ดีก็จะมีการวัดอยู่เรื่อยๆสม่ำเสมอถ้าเรามองกลับกันในเรื่องของความหลากหลายทางชีวภาพที่สัตว์ที่มันยังเคยมีอยู่ในพื้นที่นี้แล้วมันหายไปเนี่ยมันก็เป็นตัวชี้วัดว่ามันเสื่อมลงนะ1 2มันไม่สามารถทุกวันนี้ก็ยังไม่สามารถที่ฟื้นฟูกลับมาได้อย่างที่บ้านอย่างเงี้ยนะครับเป็นพื้นที่ต่ำน้ำท่วมบ่อยนะครับเราก็ต้องมาปรับตัวว่าเราจะต้องปลูกพืชอะไรที่อยู่กับน้ำเค็มได้มีอยู่เรื่องเดียวเท่านั้นคือผู้ที่ถือกฎหมายพวกนี้คุณสามารถจะดูแลพวกเราได้มากน้อยแค่ไหน
บ้านพี่สาวเนี่ยท่วมทุกวันเลยน่าสงสารจะแย่ เวลาทำขนมบางทีลอยต้องขนขึ้นมาบนบกมันท่วมเยอะบ้างตู้เย็นต้องหนุนสูงเพราะว่าพื้นที่เขาต่ำเราก็ท่วมทุกวันยิ่งมีเด็กเล็กๆนะเราจะต้องเอาไว้บนโต๊ะสูงๆอ่ะช่วงที่หลายปีก่อนเนี่ยมีลูกมีหลานเนี่ยบางทีไปทำงานต้องเอาไปที่ทำงานด้วยอ่ะเพราะว่าอยู่ริมน้ำไม่กล้าไว้อ่ะก็คือน้ำสูงมากถ้าไม่แก้1ความเป็นพื้นที่สีเขียวที่ลือชื่อเลยก็คือของเราคือปอดของกรุงเทพอ่ะหายไปแน่นอน
So we've seen from the video clip that communities in Bang Krachao, farmers in Bang Krachao, are struggling to adapt to changes wrought by climate change. They're doing their best, but they're still struggling. What recourse do the farmers of the communities in Bang Krachao have? What can they do to remedy all the negative impacts of climate change?
Actually, I have experience with other community also. facing like this. But this one, it seems like it's not by the development project, but it's by the climate change. We can do two things. We can do echo voice for the community that make the public understand and know what it happened in that area. And then after that, government have to come to support them to see how they can make the regulation to prevent the climate change. I don't think that it's easy, but it must be because it's a time to do it. And also with any other stakeholder, with the community, civil society, or business, also can come to support them to see how to bring up their life to live in the sustainable. That is very difficult, but we have to hold hand together. With other cases, we bring the case to court as well. Whenever we found that this is a lack of the responsibility from the government or from the business sector, that it depends in the cases.
What happens when you take these environmental injustice cases? I've seen you take cases against mining companies, agribusiness companies. You've taken them to court, oil and gas companies, in fact, for oil spillage. When you've taken them to court on the basis of the pollution they've created, the problems they've created, what's been your success? What's been your experience?
I would say that it's not success every cases. We also lost some cases. But first, we can bring the voice of the people to another step to go for the justice. And then when we bring them to the court, they also can share what they're suffering, what is happening in that area, to make their voice in the public in another way, not only going for the campaign and other things. Court, it also can be our advocacy. And then we use the case to make the change in the court. Even some case we lost, but we saw during the process, we found there are some changing of the practicing or regulation. It depends by the company or by the government.
Maybe even changing the attitudes towards the communities they're impacting too, yeah?
Yes, right. Because, okay, for example, we go for the justice court. It also changed not just only the judge, but it's also with the court staff over there. When the community go, people, earlier people will see that, oh, they are maybe the troublemaker. Yes, troublemaker. Right. But when they come to court and give why they have to do, then they got heard that, oh, it's not because of they want to make any problem, but it's because of they want to get protection. That is why they come and they echo their voice.
And the sympathy for their problems grows. Now, what about on the issue, though, of climate change? Have you brought any cases forward on behalf of communities to remedy problems due to climatic impacts?
Not yet, but I also have some hope that we can bring some case to see in the court. And because of this is also a challenge. We don't have a law for the climate change regulation or anything. But with this, we also can challenge to make the decision to show how the justice can protect the people, how the justice can prevent the climate change. Then even we may lose the case, but we will bring the case to see another change.
Tell me this, outside of the courts though, when do communities that you work with have a voice in policy-making circles, in decision-making circles? How are the voice of these people, if at all, being heard?
They do many ways. They do protest on the road. They do protest in their community. And with that protest, also bringing them to make a voice, to echo to the parliament or to the government, also to the business. Then we bring it to make with the policymaker to come together and then getting their recognize and awareness. And then after that, we have some decision. And some case is also happen like we're talking about the mining law in earlier, and then later on the mining law also amended on a favor of the community, like the national resources where the original of the water area should not be mining area, and that we succeed with that.
Okay, fantastic work. Thank you. Turning now to Mr. Cadiz. Mr. Cadiz, when you were commissioner for the Philippine Commission on Human Rights, you led a national inquiry into the role of the fossil fuel industry in contributing to climate change. And in that report that followed the inquiry, you found that, quote, the oil and gas industry was responsible for the willful obfuscation and obstruction of meaningful climate action. The report goes on to say that, quote, carbon measures have a corporate responsibility to conduct human rights due diligence and provide remediation. Since that report was launched, was published, released in 2022, what has been the impact?
It's too early to assess right now the impact of our report on cases filed before courts. But what the report has done was to enrich the conversation, the dialogue around the issue of climate change. And there are many factual findings in our report which the courts can actually look at.
At this moment in time, is it changing the conversation in the Philippines itself?
Yes, but not as much as we would hope to, because as far as the public is concerned, the Filipino public is concerned, it's not a front and center issue. But globally, we understand that the carbon majors have taken stock of our findings.
Now, the Philippines is considered one of the countries most at risk from climate impacts. Why isn't climate change that front and center issue?
Because we have more guttural issues right now. We have poverty issues, we have extrajudicial killing, and this is an issue that's easier for the people to understand. Climate change is a bit up there insofar as Filipinos are concerned, and also it has something to do also with our educational level. It needs a little more analysis to link climate change to human rights abuses and violations.
You were speaking earlier about the responsibility of developed countries towards developing countries, countries that put already so much carbon in the atmosphere historically, may need to compensate those countries which are still trying to raise up their income levels. In a recent climate change conference, COP27, there was this agreement to come up with a loss and damage fund. What's your view on this fund?
The industrialized countries definitely have an obligation to compensate the less industrial countries for the losses and damages that they have incurred arising from climate change. Climate change is caused by greenhouse gases, and most of these greenhouse gases have been produced by industrialized countries. They have benefited most, and they're paying less for it. We, the poorer countries, have benefited least, but are paying most for it. So that's the basis for loss and damage.
Should the advanced economies also compensate them while they're on the pathway towards more carbon output, on a pathway towards the destruction of their forests?
No, the compensation should be applied to a pathway towards scaling up and developing renewable energy, not in aggravating climate change by the cutting of forests. So there's that challenge. Now, regarding to the use of coal, there's that concept under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change called the Common but Differentiated Responsibility, because it is recognized there that developing countries need to attain a certain level of development. And as I said earlier, right now, for example, in my country, in Asia in general, most Asian countries, they do not have sufficient alternative renewable energy resources. So it's really a challenge. But in my country, if you ask us to stop using coal, with 10% renewable energy dependence, our economy will grind to a halt. So really, that's how we frame the challenge posed by climate change. They should help us transition from dirty fuel to clean, renewable energy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cadiz. Let's see now if there's any questions from our audience. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Seth. I'm from MUIC. So I have a question towards Mr. Cadiz. So far, you have talking about the responsibility of companies and the government to contribute to climate change and preventing it. But we have, as you mentioned, also consumer or the individuals are also affecting this ground. So my question is, what can we do? What can the consumer do in order to contribute to promoting environmental changes? And what action should we need to do?
So we have to alter our behavior such that our carbon footprint is less, but there are also other capacities where we can alter the climate change trajectory. We do it by electing officers who will be able to come up with policies. First, who will recognize climate change as a real existential threat. So we should elect officers who will address that problem. And also, we should, as investors, focus more our investments on renewable energy, on green energy enterprises rather than on carbon exacerbating activities.
Thank you for that important question. Any other questions from our audience? Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Shay from Mahidol University. My question is for Kunsor is, what can we do as individuals to support the communities that experience the climate injustice?
Every message that the community doing, they need an echo voice, then you can echo by your social media. The other way, you also can attend the activity that the community doing or civil society doing on the climate justice. With the court case, there are many cases that you can also attending because we have an open court. Then everyone can come to the court and observe the case. And then you can learn more what it happened in that case deeply. And you also yourself can share information that you have to your society. And then lastly, as your position as a student, you also can do your own activity to support. Greta, she also doing some campaign by herself, and then she also support the community. Then you also can do the campaign by yourself for your issue or helping the community for their issue. This is a climate justice movement.
Thank you to both of our speakers today, our studio audience, and everyone watching at home. We look forward to seeing you again. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.